Hey guys, I want to show you a really interesting game that happened between Grandmasters Pentala Harikrishna and Vidit Gujrathi at Prague. So let's look at this game, which has a lot of beautiful moments in it and lots to probe into and learn from. So white was Harikrishna and he went for d4, and Vidit played knight to f6, and then they went for this Nimzo Indian opening. So Hare Krishna goes e3, nothing special. Castles, bishop d3, d5. This has been played thousands of times. Takes, takes. Both players are obviously pretty familiar with this. And now Hare Krishna plays a3. So he's inviting, of course, bishop takes e3. Because if that happens, then white gets the two bishops. And it's obviously not something that black wants to concede so early, so he drops the bishop back, plays bishop to d6. Okay, so all this is known. So queen c2, now he is keeping an eye on h7 and sort of pressuring this knight a little bit. He's also in some lines threatening knight to b5 and hitting this bishop, because if he manages to trade off this strong knight dark squared bishop, then he's got the two bishops again. So black plays c6 and not only strengthens d5 but also relieves this knight of holding d5, so knight's protecting h7 now. But I'll come back to this in a bit, because there's other moves that black can play in this position. So c6 anyway, and then knight g2 e2, rook e8, bishop d2, b6. So black is now planning to go c5 with the help of this pawn on b6. And after Hare Krishna plays f3, he indeed goes c5, which makes me pause a little bit and brings me back to this moment when black played c6, and I was like, why not b6 right here? Because yes, you get knight b5 as white, but then black can go c5 and say, you can take my bishop, but I've got some activity here. So let's see that line. If takes, let's say, then queen takes d6, and now you can see that white's not castle. White's king is out here in the middle, and he's planning to use his two bishops, but he has to do it quickly, otherwise black will open up the e-file and get activity on his king. So he plays b3 so that he can play bishop b2 and then defend this pawn with the bishop, but that's already too late because c takes d, and after e takes d, he's got the open file against his king, but the knight can come to e2 to defend. But black's main strategic move in this position is bishop to a6, because now once he gets rid of this guy, then black will have a completely fine game. For example, if knight e2, then black can even play rook c8 first, hit the queen, and once this bishop is traded off, then white doesn't have the two bishops, and in fact he's left with this dark squared bishop, which is not the most active piece in this position, and he doesn't have any obvious targets. In fact, he is mostly going to be trying to hold this pawn. So that would be a plan for black with b6, but then white doesn't have to take on d6. White can just play a move like b3, and so he keeps control on d4. So if takes, then he might take with the knight, and then black's got an isolated pawn on d5, but he also is threatening bishop to b2, and then he'll not, after c takes, he won't need to play e takes d4, he'll take with the bishop then, and then black is left with the isolated pawn on d5. So b3, and then black, let's say, realizes that he cannot now prevent that, so you could drop his bishop, and then knight f3, and the game could develop along these lines. So I'm sure that Vidit Gujrathi has studied all of this, and he is not too keen on going for this just yet. So that's the interesting point about playing b6 first and not c6. So anyway, c6 first, and after f3, then he goes c5, because now this e3 pawn is weakened, and with e3 weakened, c5 is just the right kind of move you want to make, because then e4 becomes difficult, because then d4 is weak. So c5 comes in at just the right time as e3 is weak. So now here Hari Krishna played a really interesting move. He played b4, which is a sacrifice of a pawn, and pretty much invites with it to take this pawn and um, just grab the extra pawn if he wants to. But if that happens, what happens here is that white gets a really strong center, and plus now he's got f3 in the position. Now he can threaten g4 and start advancing on the king side because his center is really solid. Black has an extra pawn here, but you know, that's too slow and it's not going to cause white immediate problems, whereas with g4 and g5 white can cause some serious problems for black in this position. So that's obviously the idea with b4. And with it, in fact, took a long time to study this position. In fact, he took something like 43 minutes, which was, I think, a huge mistake because it just burned a lot of time on his clock for what should have been a relatively simple decision for him. But I guess he was trying to calculate too many lines, and perhaps he even saw a move like g6 in this position. So what's the point of g6? Well, imagine if black ignores this and plays c4. Then white can play bishop f5. And then we see that this pawn on d5 is really weak. And this knight is going to be perpetually tied to the defense of this pawn. And if these two bishops come off, then you can see that there's more pressure falling on this point on d5. And now that d4 is not challenged, it's going to be much easier for white to start pushing e4 and e5 in the future. So there are some drawbacks, serious drawbacks to playing c4. Although the engines may be able to handle this position, but for humans, this is not a pleasing position to go into. So we see that that's the problem with playing c4 immediately. But if black had played g6 in this position, then he's avoiding bishop f5 because now you can just take on f5. And white now has a serious problem trying to solve this c4 threat from black, because it's really not easy. In fact, the engines show that white has to play a superficial move like bishop to b5, but then after a move like bishop to e7, black is doing just fine, and this sacrifice is not really in white's favor at all in this position. So with it could have played like this and got a reasonable position. In fact, uh, um, more than a reasonable position. But he decided after a long think to take the pawn, because why not? It's a free pawn, and in chess there's a saying that the best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. Of course, that's, that every such saying has its exceptions, and I think that this position is an exception, because in order to refute this sacrifice, you got to be extremely accurate with black, and he was not in this game, as we shall see. So Hari Krishna here, instead of taking a b4, played knight b5, so that he chops off this dark squared bishop on d6, and then he's got the two bishops and he's got a strong center. So he's got all of his remaining pieces playing a really or in a really active position to start the attack with moves like g4 and g5 and so on. So okay, he with it takes on a3, and now Hare Krishna plays e4. So g4 is probably a little slow in this position, whereas e4 is causing immediate problems, because now there's no more tension on white center. So why do you want to play g4? Because d4 is strong anyway, and with e4 you create an additional threat of e5 and forking these two pieces. So e4 is pretty logical. There was another idea of playing a move like king to f2, And so instead of castling, so that now you're ready to play g4 and bring perhaps this rook on this side if need be, so the rooks are connected, and a sample line could go like bishop a6, g4 takes, knight b7, g5, and after a6, bishop d3. This position for white is so dangerous that the engines thinks that it's actually a good idea for black to ignore this knight that's hanging and just play b5 and sacrifice a piece. And after takes, knight takes, and black has compensation for the lost piece thanks to his passed pawns on the queen side, and the insecure position of white's king, and so on. It's a pretty double-edged position, and pretty rich position, and it's not clear to me just looking at it how white would proceed in this position. So it's a pretty interesting situation that could have happened. But anyway, e4 is just more direct, so why not e4? So takes, and now pawn takes. Now he's threatening e5, and unfortunately for black, there's not much he can do about it, because let's say if he drops the bishop, bishop f8, then there's always knight c7 in the position, defended by the queen, of course, and then he's threatening both these rooks, and that's not gonna work for black. So Vidit saw that, and he played the best move in the position, which is bishop to a6, attacking this knight. And after e5, he allows the fork of his two pieces, but then takes, and rook takes e5. Excellent play by Vidit so far. So now what's happened is white's lost all of his central pawns. He's only got these two pawns on the king side. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So he's got 4 extra pawns for the lost piece. Plus white's piece on b5 is a little bit loose, and he's loosely defended by this bishop, which is loosely defended by this queen. And the bishop also loosely defends this knight, and the king is not yet castled, and so on. So there's a lot of looseness in white's position here, whereas black's rook on e5 is really strong. Black's queen on d8 is really strong. If black manages to get this rook into the position somehow, then it'll be a really dangerous position for white. But he's not there yet. So Harikrishna found the right response, which was bishop to c3. Now he hits this rook, and that created some problem for Vidit Gujrathi, because the most obvious move is to just win 2 pieces back. Rook takes b5, and then bishop takes, and then bishop takes, and you won 2 pieces for the rook, and you've got extra pawns. So you have tremendous compensation for the lost exchange. But the only problem for here is there's an immediate blow, bishop takes f6, and now queen takes f6 is not on because queen c8 check and mate. So black has to play gf6, and then after rook takes a3, you can see that black's king is exposed, and this rook has a free reign to just move anywhere on the king side and start attacking. Although with a move like knight d7, knight f8, black could perhaps hold this position, and he probably will, but it's not the most pleasant position to play as black. And so I'm sure that he looked at it, and he didn't like this at all from a human perspective. But the next logical move that he should have considered, and I'm sure that he did consider, is bishop takes b5. Because now, if bishop takes e5, then, well, not bishop takes bishop, because now rook d1. And this bishop is pinned to the queen with check. And that bishop is lost, and so is the game. And if let's say queen e7 moving out of the pin, then you can just take here. And if queen takes, then, well, I'm sure there's many different puzzle rush types tactics here with, let's say, queen c8 or rook d8. And the back rank is extremely weak for black. So that wouldn't work. But after bishop takes b5, bishop takes, black had queen takes d3, and this is probably what Vidit Gujrathi missed, because I'm sure he saw this and he thought probably that after queen takes, bishop takes, rook d1, we have the same problem of the back rank mate, but he was mistaken, because here black had a really interesting resource with knight to c6, solving his back rank problem and also attacking this loose piece on e5. Because so if knight rook takes d3, then black has knight takes e5, and he's doing completely fine. And if white plays bishop takes f6, then black first takes on e2, attacking this rook, and after takes, and black has tremendous compensation for his lost exchange. So that would have been a completely fine position for Vidit Gujrathi, but I think that he missed this in his calculations, and that was an unfortunate miss. And it should be pointed out that queen c8 doesn't work because simply knight e8 and holds the king, and there's no back rank mate on. In fact, white's own king is in danger of getting checkmated here. So Vidit missed that, and I think he blew the game with this move, knight c6, um, because now uh, obviously his point is you cannot take the rook, because then knight b4 hits the queen, and not only hits the queen, it hits the queen with check to the king, queen and bishop. So that's going to be lost, because white does not have the time to play bishop takes f6. He just loses queen with check. So bishop takes e5 is not on immediately, but what is on for white is rook to d1. Really good move from Harikrishna. And threatening bishop takes h7 with check, and then rook takes queen. So now Vidit had to find another incredible move, which he failed to find. And he played a pretty human move, because you have to protect your queen. So Vidit played queen to e7, allowing this rook to be taken. But then after takes and knight takes, he's down a whole rook in the position. White just has an extra rook. And yes, he has some tactics here, but still it's a whole rook, at least temporarily down. But the move that the engines were showing in this position is incredible. Rook to g5, sacrificing the queen after, sacrificing the queen for a few pieces. Takes, and rook takes, and rook takes. And let's look at the material here. White has a rook, black has a rook. This knight cancels out that knight. The knight for a knight, bishop for a bishop. So queen against rook in this position. But the problem is white's pieces are completely discoordinated, and they are in trouble. His king is not castled, his rook is out of play. He's got fewer pawns. Black has 3 passed pawns on this side, and his rooks are extremely active, and all of that compensates for the fact that white has a queen against a rook. This is really incredible. Let's say, for the sake of demonstration, if white plays a casual or careless move, like let's say knight takes a3, then black can simply play rook to e8 and pin this knight to the king, and that's pretty much game over, because this knight's going to be lost. Rook takes g2 is coming next. So white would have to play it like knight b to d4, and after takes, knight takes d4, knight f6. Now white's king cannot castle, this rook cannot still come into the game, which gives black dynamic compensation. Really interesting. Perhaps Vidit may have seen this if he had enough time on his clock. Maybe he was running short in time here, because he used a lot of his time on that critical decision in the game. But really interesting moment in the game. But he played queen e7, and now he lost his whole rook. And white takes the time now to castle, because black does not have immediate threats in the position. Yes, he can take this loose bishop, but white just takes it back and still defends the knight. And so now, if he can just get in one move to save this knight, he'll be just up a whole rook, and there's nothing that black can do in this position. So black has to play for some activity with his pieces to target this weak knight, that weak knight, plus this X-ray attack on that rook. This is another instructive moment in the game, because while black is doing that, he has to use all his remaining pieces, which is this bishop is already being used. That rook can get used immediately. This queen can be used immediately. This knight is out of play. And so Vidit should have, in this position, played the incredible move knight g4. And you may think, how is that getting the knight into play? Because isn't the action on this side? But the point is, sometimes when the action's on one side, you can create threats on another side, and then the defending side is not able to defend both sides. So with this knight on g4, what Vidit could have argued is that while you're busy defending this knight and dealing with the effects of this pin, I'm going to start creating threats on this side. First of all, I'm threatening knight e3 with forking both your rooks. I can even play queen e3, trade off queens, and then fork your two rooks. So that was a really interesting move. So let's say if queen f3, then queen e3 check, and now he has to trade, and now he forks the two rooks, plus this knight is in danger. So then he would have recovered and exchanged back, and then he doesn't have that much of a bad position at all, because he's got 4 pawns for the piece, and that would be tremendous compensation for black. And it's not easy to defend against knight e3. So let's say white plays a move like rook to f3. We'll come back to this position and see why that's that makes a difference with the knight on g4 and this rook on f3. So first, let me show you what happened in the game. Queen takes d3, and we played queen c5, threatening this knight, double attack, and also checking, but white played knight d4, defending. And now after rook d8, pinning this knight, because now he's threatening, let's say white plays a careless move like h3, then bishop takes b5, and this knight is pinned, so you can't even take. So queen takes, but now rook takes d4, and this rook is defended. And if he takes the queen, well, the rook is still defended. So that's a problem. So that's a threat. So how to deal with that threat? Harikrishna found rook f to e1, because now if bishop takes b5, then queen takes b5, and after rook takes d4, white has rook e8 check, and takes, and black has to drop the queen back to defend mate, and after takes, white wins the rook. Even then, this position is tricky, because black can play b5, and how do you stop this pawn from going through? Because black can now play a5 and b4 and start creating activity on this queen side and start pushing this pawn. In fact, actually, you can just push a2, and then white can't stop the pawns. But white has a really good tactical resource in this position, which is rook d8 check. And after king e7, he plays rook b8, because now if b4, of course, then you just take the pawn. If he goes here, then the point is not rook takes b5, but rook b7 check, and then grabs that pawn and that one. And if a6, then rook b6, and same thing, grabbing this pawn and then that one. So white would win that way. So rook f to e1. And now let's say he goes a2 with like he did in the game, then Harikrishna can simply play queen c3 and get out of this pin. And now imagine if he plays takes here, takes, and queens, and after rook takes, he can take this, but whoops, rook takes a6, and that is a problem. So let's see the difference that would have been in the position if white had black had played knight g4 and forcing a move like rook f3, because now if check, knight d4, now rook d8, queen c3. Now the problem for white is that this rook is no longer defended by that rook. So just by moving this knight from f6 to g4, what you achieved was distracting this defender and moving him away from the action. So you're saying, okay, my knight cannot participate in the attack, but I'm going to create some chaos on the other side, which will at least distract one of your defenders, and then create some more looseness in your position. So now, as a result of this move knight g4 and this rook being distracted, black has bishop takes b5 in the position. Because now knight takes b5 is not on, first of all, because he's pinned. And if he removes the pin with queen takes c5, and after takes, the knight is pinned in a different way with rook takes rook. Because if takes, this rook is no longer defended, and rook takes rook comes with check. So that's really an important revelation from this game of how to use your inactive piece to, if it cannot participate in the activity, at least use him to distract one of your opponent's pieces, and so take out a crucial defender from the from the opponent's camp. So I think that that's probably a really important revelation from this game. So anyway, queen c5, he missed that, and now Harikrishna was able to take advantage of his coordinated pieces and play queen c3. And as we have seen, queen takes c3 is not on here. Bishop takes b5 is not on also, because now he just takes, knight takes b5, and this time the rook is defended because he's not on f3, he's on e1, and just holds everything and saves white's position. In fact, white just wins. So Vidit saw that, and he just pretty much effectively resigned and said played h6 because he doesn't have anything. So now Harikrishna cleans up the position with queen takes queen, and now knight c7 saves his knight, attacks that bishop. Bishop c4, now he saves the other piece, and Vidit tries the last thing he can try, which is takes, and then bishop d3 is threatening bishop b1, and queens, you cannot take this bishop, of course he's threatening the queen, but rook a1, no problem. Bishop b1, unfortunately he doesn't have a dark squared bishop to attack this rook and trade him off, and his knight is too far away from b3 or c2 to cause any problems. So Harikrishna just starts moving his king towards the action. Yes, Vidit wins a pawn here, but that's not gonna be relevant. Harikrishna brings his remaining pieces back. He defends his only remaining pawn on g2. Now this guy will fall, and so will the game, because now he's clearly up a whole rook. In fact, he cannot even play f4 because white has rook a4, and after this bishop moves back, he can play a move like, let's say, knight d5. Actually, not in this position. Maybe rook a6 or something. Let's say bishop b7, then let's knight d5, and he cannot win g2. So he played g5, just making a few moves, knight c to d5, king f7. He's lost the game, but I think that psychologically he wants to play a few more moves just to keep going. Knight c3, and he realizes it's completely over, and he resigned the game. But I think a lot of interesting ideas and themes in this game, going back to that important moment when Harikrishna played b4, and I think psychologically speaking, it's hard to not play c takes b4, because if you're offered a free pawn and you don't take it, it's sort of like giving too much credit to your opponent, and pretty much saying to your opponent, like, I don't know what you're doing, but what you're doing is probably good, so I don't want to accept the pawn that you've sacrificed. And that's sort of it's giving your opponent a level of respect that perhaps you don't want to give him, and that's why he took the pawn. But in fact, I think that practically speaking, g6 was probably a better move for him to play. Or if he wanted to take the pawn, why not just take it immediately? Why think for 40 minutes? And so I think that was a huge psychological mistake from Vidit in this. Not psychological, but I think just in terms of time management. So he could have ignored the threat with g6, or he could have played c takes b4 quickly and saved time on his clock. But that was one of the key moments. And then, as we saw in this position where he missed bishop takes b5, and also at that key position where he could have played this incredible move knight g4, which seems to move away from the action, but as we have seen, the point of that is to distract one of white's defenders from the action as well. and then black's remaining pieces can coordinate really well. So I hope you enjoyed this game and learned something from it. I surely did, and hope to bring you some more interesting such revelations in the future. See you next time.